The legal confrontation in Luxembourg. Currently, within a legal chamber in Luxembourg, the world's most potent electronic overseer is being compelled to justify itself, rather than the reverse. A €120 million penalty, the biggest ever proclaimed via Europe's defining web statute, has been contested in public court by one person, and that person is also individually identified on the petition. Elon Musk avoided recruiting lobbyists. He avoided making a silent pact in a hidden space in Brussels. He submitted documents. He entered the General Court of the European Union and informed them their whole framework could be unlawful. No one has ever attempted this previously. And what occurs hereafter could alter who governs the net indefinitely. It commenced on a weekday late in the year. In the stonewalled center of the European Commission in Brussels, a media bulletin went out that was 2 years in the making. Henna Verken, the European Commission's lead vice president for tech autonomy, safety, and republic, stood before the lenses and declared that Elon Musk's social media outlet X had been charged $120 million, the value of roughly $140 million for breaching the bloc's Defining Digital Services Act. The phrases she picked were not tactful. They were a manifesto. Tricking users with blue check icons, hiding data on promotions, and locking out academics have no spot online in the EU. She remarked the DSA defends users. The Commission had crafted its argument for 24 months. They had probes, attorneys, info experts, and the total power of European corporate supremacy behind them. They had anticipated this instant to strike like a mallet. What occurred instead shocked them. Within moments of the publication, Musk was on X, his own outlet, striking back in a way no boss of a giant tech firm had ever done previously. He didn't deliver a measured legal reply through a media department. He labeled the fine in block letters. He went further. He made an allegation that sent vibrated pulses through Brussels. He asserted the European Commission had covertly contacted X with what he termed an unlawful hidden pact, a quid pro quo. According to Musk, the suggestion was basic. Consent to silently block material in a way the EU desired, and the penalty vanishes. He posted openly that other outlets had taken that pact. X had not. And because X had not, the penalty had arrived. X did not, he stated, and then he pledged something that no Silicon Valley tycoon had ever pledged a European regulator previously. This will be a very public clash in court. To grasp how remarkable this instant was, you have to grasp what occurred before it. When Musk bought Twitter in late 2022 for $44 billion, the European Union was in the midst of launching the most daring internet control in history. The Digital Services Act, the DSA, had been passed in 2022, and it arrived with force. Any outlet with over 45 million regular users in the European Union was labeled as a very large online outlet. The statutes for those outlets were broad. Harsh monitoring of illegal material, required openness around branding, total data entry for neutral academics, frequent neutral reviews, and partnership with regulators. The sanction for non-compliance was not a caution. It was a penalty of up to 6% of total yearly income. For a firm like X, that figure could potentially expand into the hundreds of millions. Musk viewed those statutes and from the very start handled them with what Brussels leaders would later term as disdain. He ended content policing groups. He brought back hundreds of profiles that had earlier been shut. He openly ridiculed the DSA. He termed EU regulators speech suppressors. He remarked on his own outlet that Europe was trying to construct what he termed a digital iron curtain, a framework where regimes picked what was factual, what was risky, and what people were permitted to view. Where other Silicon Valley titans, Facebook, Google, Apple, had studied the law, hired legal teams, and modified their outlets to please Brussels, Musk did something different. He intensified. Every European leader who blamed him received a public reply. Every regulatory claim was met not with discussion, but with defiance. The European Commission started its formal probe into X in late 2023. It was from the start the most watched DSA trial in history. The probers concentrated on 3 distinct fields. First, X's blue check mark. Once a badge of confirmed identity utilized for stars, leaders, and public icons, now marketed to any user ready to spend roughly €7 per month. The Commission maintained this was a dishonest layout habit that made it impossible for users to discern whether a profile was genuine or a script. Second, X's branding archive, the instrument legally needed to display who was buying which ads and why, was judged to be flawed, lacking vital data that regulators required to spot bias campaigns and global meddling. Third, X was actively stopping academics from reaching public info on the outlet, charging fees, legal bans, and technical hurdles that made neutral research of the outlet's internal risk truly impossible. For 2 years, the Commission crafted its argument. EU leaders later noted one of the causes for the gap. They had foreseen that X, unlike every other outlet, would contest the penalty in court. They wanted to make their legal stance unshakable. On a late date in 2025, they put out their decree. The penalty was split up in exact parts. 45 million euros for the dishonest blue check mark framework, 35 million euros for branding openness flaws, and 40 million euros for stopping academics. Henna Verkin stated that the EU would keep every outlet liable. Elon Musk declared combat. But here is the doubt nobody in Brussels was ready to answer on that specific afternoon. What if Musk had been dreaming for this instant far longer than they had? In early 2026, just 10 weeks after the penalty was delivered, X submitted its protest at the General Court of the European Union in Luxembourg. The records named not just Scorp, but various trade groups tied to the outlet. And Elon Musk himself individually as a suitor. This was not a standard legal reply. This was a paper crafted to do something much bigger than cancel a €120 million sanction. It was a bid to put the whole framework of the Digital Services Act on trial. The phrasing in the record was remarkable. X's Global State Affairs Group put out a public note that did not blunt a single phrase. This EU decree came from a flawed and shallow probe, heavy process mistakes, a strained reading of the duties under the DSA, and constant gaps of rights of defense, and basic fair trial needs hinting at legal prejudice. That term legal prejudice was not picked by chance. It was a blunt claim that the European Commission had not applied the law fairly, that the probe into X had been led not by legal truth, but by group intent, and it was a claim that if validated in court could do terminal harm to the DSA's standing. The legal protest relied on a point that law experts across Europe had actually been pondering quietly for years. Under the DSA, the European Commission holds a uniquely potent spot. It drafts the statutes. It starts the probes. It collects the proof. It concludes whether that proof is enough. And it enforces the penalties. There is no neutral attorney. There is no distinct judging body. The same group that crafted the argument against X was the same group that ruled X was guilty. X's legal group, assisted in court by the Free Speech Legal Advocacy Group Alliance Defending Freedom International, maintained this cluster of power, monitor, attorney, and judge all-in-one breached the most basic tenets of fair process. The trial was termed by legal experts as the first true chance for an EU court to check whether the Commission's policing of the DSA was aligned with the rule of law. To grasp how volatile this point was, think who was observing. Every big tech outlet functioning in Europe was giving close notice. Under the DSA, any of them could be following. Apple had already been penalized €500 million under a linked EU statute, the Digital Markets Act, in early 2025. Meta had been penalized €200 million under the same statute. But those firms had not fought back the way X was fighting back. They had paid, changed, and moved along. If X's constitutional protest worked, if the court ruled that the Commission's twin role as prober and judge was truly misaligned with European legal tenets, it would not just cancel X's fine. It would mandate a grand rethink of how every big outlet penalized in Europe was being calculated and policed. The results were valued far more than €120 million. They were valued the whole control framework the EU had spent years building. Then there was the state factor, and this is the part of the account that changed a firm legal row into a total ocean-crossing clash. The penalty had not even been declared before U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance posted on X, blaming it in advance, labeling it a strike on free expression. Secretary of State Marco Rubio labeled the sanction a strike on all American tech outlets. President Trump, questioned about the penalty days after it arrived, remarked, "Europe is moving in some harsh paths. It's very harmful for the citizens." These were not the words of leaders watching from afar. The United States regime was viewing Europe's DSA policing as a foreign policy matter. And the person at the heart of that policing, Elon Musk, now had direct paths into the top tiers of American state power. He was not a witness in the ocean-crossing talk about digital control. He was one of its most dominant voices. The U.S. House Judiciary Group, led by Representative Jim Jordan, had been conducting its own parallel drive against the DSA for over a year. In mid-2025, the group put out a staff brief titled The Foreign Censorship Threat, claiming that EU law was being used to force global outlets to limit state talk that would be fully guarded under the American First Amendment. The group ordered records from U.S. tech firms about how they had reacted to DSA weight. In early 2026, the group put out the full 183-page European Commission policing decree against X before the EU itself had made it public. The hint from Washington was impossible to misinterpret. America was not going to wait quietly while Brussels penalized its biggest tech outlets into submission. Inside the European Commission, the mood had turned. The trial had been planned as a display of power. Evidence that the DSA could be policed against even the most defiant outlet on the globe. It was now something else entirely. Every week that Musk declined to pay, every legal record that put the Commission's own steps under review. Every American leader who termed the penalty as a type of state targeting. Each of these shifted the account a few steps further away from the script Brussels had penned. In that script, X was a stray outlet that had failed its users and was being held to task. In the script that was now growing abroad, Brussels was a control group that had built a potent blocking tool, pointed it at the one outlet that refused to submit, and was now viewing that tool be contested in open court for the first time in its life. And there was the point of what Musk had remarked about the hidden pact. His public claim that the Commission had suggested a pact where silent blocking submission would make the penalty vanish was backed in its basic form by EU leaders themselves. Though they termed it very differently. The Commission noted that the DSA held a standard deal path where firms could skip penalties by suggesting legally bound vows to alter their conduct freely. According to EU leaders, X had first asked about this path through its attorneys. Musk then pushed away the rules, what he termed an unlawful hidden pact the Commission termed standard steps. But the fact that such a path existed, that the standard track for the biggest outlets in the world was not policing but quiet talk, had already sown a seed of hesitation in the public heart that Brussels had not foreseen. The trial is now in the care of the General Court of the European Union situated in Luxembourg, the second top court in the whole EU legal framework. This is where X submitted its protest in early 2026. The European Commission stated it was aware of the protest and noted it was prepared to guard its decree in court. That reply was sober. What it did not remark was how long this clash would last, how far it might reach, and what it would cost both parties, not just in legal costs, but in group trust. EU General Court trials of this depth and state weight usually take years. The typed steps alone, the swap of legal points, the replies, the answers can last 18 months to 3 years before any trial is set. If the court rules against the Commission on process grounds, it could cancel the penalty entirely. If it rules that specific parts of the DSA as used by the Commission breach basic rights, it could scrap parts of the law itself. And if that occurs, every other DSA policing move against Meta, against TikTok, against Google becomes legally shaky. The whole policing framework that Brussels has spent 3 years crafting would need to be remade with different bases. There is also a second probe moving in parallel that adds another path of depth to this already volatile state. In early 2026, the European Commission started a new hunt into X, mainly focused on its artificial intelligence aid, Grok. The fears involved the spread of illegal material, faked photos, and material tied to sex-based harm. Ireland's data protection group started its own hunt into X over similar fears. The UK's Information Leaders Desk declared a formal hunt into how X was using private data in link with the Grok tool. X is not fighting one line in Europe. It is fighting many at once. And the protest that Musk submitted in early 2026 is only one part of a legal clash that spans across many zones and many control groups. The results for actual people are not vague. For the 450 million people of the European Union, the result of this trial will fix what kind of outlet X is allowed to be inside EU lines. If the Commission triumphs and the penalty is kept, X meets not just the €120 million sanction, but the legal task to deeply alter 3 main parts of how it works. Its badge framework, its branding database, and its link with academics. The Commission gave X 60 days from late 2025 to start fixing the gaps. If X misses the mark, more policing moves could follow. And the DSA permits for penalties of up to 6% of global yearly income for steady non-compliance. Based on X's guessed 2024 income of around $2.5 billion, already lower roughly 50% from its pre-Musk high, 6% would total nearly $150 million. Combined, the fiscal weight on an outlet that is already by most guesses working in a deeply strained trade spot could become terminal. For the wider tech world, the results are even bigger. This is not just about one outlet or one penalty. This is the first time any firm has walked into a European court and openly contested the legal basis of DSA policing. Alliance Defending Freedom International, which is backing X's legal trial, pitched it clearly as a check of whether Brussels can rule the global digital public yard. If the Commission's cluster of power goes unchallenged, their note read, it will further fix a highly flawed rule for talk control across the EU and further. Every Silicon Valley firm working in Europe is viewing to see whether the protest sticks. If it does, many of them will have their own attorneys silently checking the same legal points. The ocean crossing part of this trial is not fading either. The US Congress has already placed itself into this row in a way that has no record. The publication of the 183-page Commission policing decree by the House Judiciary Group put out before Brussels itself made it public was a note about how Washington plans to join with European digital control in the years ahead. American leaders have framed DSA policing not as a buyer safety point, but as a trade and power point. Whether that framing eventually leads to formal trade-linked replies between Washington and Brussels is one of the most vital open doubts in the whole ocean crossing bond currently. And then there is the human part, the one that makes this account impossible to turn to a basic row between a tycoon and an office. Somewhere between Brussels claiming that paid blue check marks trick users and Musk claiming that the DSA is a blocking tool, there are hundreds of millions of people who use X every day. People who view news on it, people who swap state views on it, people who unite on it, clash on it, record news on it. Whatever the court picks about the DSA's legal setup, those people will live with the effect. If Brussels triumphs, the outlet they use will alter. If Musk triumphs, the framework made to keep that outlet liable will alter. Either way, nothing about the web in Europe will appear the same when this is finished. Elon Musk entered this as the target. He may exit it as the man who forced the most potent digital control framework in the world to prove itself in open court and found it had fewer truths than anyone hoped. Brussels tossed $120 million at him. He submitted records contesting the whole base of the law that made that fine. The first ever legal protest to a DSA penalty is now before the EU's General Court. The trial has not been set yet, but the vibrated pulses from what occurs next will be sensed from San Francisco to Brussels to every spot of the web you use every single day. If this account counts to you, and it ought to because it is about who governs what you are permitted to view, swap, and remark online, then press join so you do not miss a single update. This trial is moving fast. The results have never been higher, and the next decree from that court in Luxembourg could alter everything. Like this clip if you believe this clash earns more notice than the main media is giving it. And inform us in the remarks, do you believe Musk can actually triumph? Because the answer is far less sure than Brussels wants you to trust.